As you take a look at competency 3, it can be quite overwhelming to think about what is it that I really need to focus on that's going to best help prepare me, first of all, to be successful on the CNE exam. But then, second of all, which area do I want to focus on to help me be a really good nurse educator as it relates to this competency? Well, you're not alone if that's a question that you have had as you have moved forward on your journey. In this snapshot, that's exactly what we'll be focusing on. What content should you study related to assessment and evaluation strategies? And what content is it that you should not study? We're going to start with just 3 resources. So the first one is Dr. Billings and Halstead, Teaching and Nursing. If you have the 6th edition, that's great. If you have the 7th edition, the crosswalk is listed right here in the description. But on looking at table 26.1, it's going to be page 498. This is where you're going to see some sample evaluation strategies and tools by category. And this is specific to clinical. Okay, so chapter 26 is all about clinical performance evaluation. And you may wonder, wait a minute, I thought we're talking about CNE. Well, we do focus primarily on the CNE for our snapshots, but much of our content correlates with the CNE novice as well as the CNE clinical. We had a colleague, we've had several colleagues actually, who've mentioned to us, you know what, when I was taking the exam, I wondered if I was taking the right exam. There were so many clinical questions. Well, this is what we know. It's not necessarily specific to the clinical setting, but it is about how do we align our didactic teaching strategies to ensure that students are competent when they are demonstrating these skills in the clinical setting. If you get to the exam and you have that question, just know you're not alone. You want to make sure you do 2 things. Number 1, read that question and make sure you are confident in what the question is asking you. Okay, so know what the question is asking you. Number 2, think about it. What is it that I know for sure about content related to this question? Okay, so number 1, when you're on this journey, is making sure that you know Billings and Halstead is your primary resource to really dig deeper into the content that you will need to know in order to reach that application and analysis level on the CNA exam. 70 to 80% of those questions are going to be pulled from those higher levels on Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy, if that's a gap area for you, take a look at page 188 and 189 in Billings and Halstead. That is going to help you close your knowledge gaps, making sure you're focusing on those 3 areas as it relates to Bloom's taxonomy that you want to solidify before you show up for the exam. All right, so that's one resource. One other resource while we're here is going to be in chapter 24. It is table 24.1. Now, this is one of my favorites because it gives you an excellent overview of evaluation strategies. And not only that, it includes the domain and assessment purpose related to the evaluation strategy, as well as possible applications, some of the pros and cons related to the evaluation strategies, as well as issues that are very common related to that specific evaluation tool. And then the last resource we want to point out is going to be from Dr. Caputi's review book. Okay, so it's all about the right resources. So resource number 2 is going to be Dr. Caputi's CNE review book. And this is going to be on page 57. It's table 3.2, sample grading rubric for nursing diagnosis and nursing actions assignment. There's also a great review of what grading rubrics are and the benefit that they will provide for you as you move forward on your journey for CNE, or again, just to be a better nurse educator. And then the third resource that we're going to share is our study workbook. You may already have it. We know that we are more likely to retain. Some research says 50% more likely. Some says even 70% more likely to retain information when we put pen to paper. Okay, so that's what we want you to do. You can take a look at part 3, evaluation in our study workbook. That's going to start on page 41. If you don't have our study workbook, just print out the study worksheet. You see it right here in the description as well. You're going to put today's date. We're focusing on competency 3, but I want you to think about, what is your objective for showing up today? What is it that you want to accomplish at the end of our time together in this snapshot? And then what you're going to see is your weekly planner. We added this based on requests from colleagues. That's on page 43. And you're going to write down, what is it that you're going to focus on this week related to this concept. All right, and then last but not least, in your study workbook on page 49, this is where you're going to see some information about reliability and 3 factors that affect reliability and ways that you can improve reliability. And you will find information directly in Billings and Halstead in the chapters that we've talked about. 24, you can find some information, as well as 25 and 26 to help you close your knowledge gaps. All right, so let's get into our content. If you have any questions about any of the resources here that we're going to talk about, email us info@drsellarseducate.com. All right, so we're focusing on rubrics and evaluation tools. So, what is it that you need to focus on, and what is it that you don't need to focus on? First of all, this is competency 3. You want to assess your gaps. You want to follow evidence based practices, and you want to reinforce the value of that timely feedback. Our ability to give students feedback, especially that formative feedback, is going to be so impactful as they think about how they're going to close their gaps and what resources they're going to use. So let's take a look at our thought-provoking question. The nurse educator is working on new ways to evaluate students to better help them prepare for the final exam. Which tool is most appropriate for formative evaluation? We have an A, reflection journal, B, research paper, or C, scheduled quiz. So think about which example is most appropriate for formative evaluation. Next, we're going to take a look at our research model. So here's the question. Which of these do you think is going to be content that you will be asked about on the exam? So we have clinical evaluation tools, we have exam blueprint. What do you think? Yes or no? Do you think these are questions that you should expect to see or may expect to see on the exam? All right, so if you chose yes, you are correct. Now, this is what you need to know. As it relates to the evaluation tools, you want to know, what does the evidence say about that specific evaluation tool? If you're not able to integrate that specific tool that you're going to use to validate that learning has happened, just make sure you are aligning whatever tool you're creating to those evidence-based standards. Okay, so I'll give you an example. When we look at the SSPD tool, it gives you a lot of specific clinical indicators that we should look for to validate that students are indeed competent. However, if you're not able to use that tool, then what you want to do is make sure you're aligning your development of your specific tool to the evidence. Okay. And then, second of all, make sure students have a copy of that tool. We don't want students to be surprised. We want them to be aware of how we're evaluating them and what specific clinical behaviors we are expecting them to be able to demonstrate. And then last, you want to integrate both formative and summative tools. We do have a list of those tools right here in the study workbook. That's going to be on page 48. All right, so if you chose yes, you are correct. And then last but not least, we want to wrap up in looking at our thought-provoking question. So let's go back and see what you thought. Let's see if you thought that yes, you should take a look at it, or no, you should not take a look at some of the content that we are talking about. Oh, and last but not least, I meant to go over rubrics as well. So rubrics on page 57, this is where you're going to see that summary of what grading rubrics are. This, in simple terms, is going to provide an objective way for students to be knowledgeable about how we're going to evaluate them. And most importantly, how do we determine if they have earned 1 point or if they've earned the maximum points, as an example, which would be 5. Our ability to share the tool, the rubric, with students will help guide them as they are completing the assignment to ensure that they're not missing content from the assignment that they submit that we will be looking for. All right, so that's the answer to rubrics. And now when we look at our thought-provoking question, if you chose C, scheduled quiz, you are correct. So give yourself a round of applause. Quizzes allow us to gather data from students about whether or not they have fully comprehended a concept. Our ability to then give students feedback allows them time to make modifications, maybe to their study plan, or maybe they need to spend time with us clarifying a muddy point. Either way, that formative feedback is going to shift that responsibility to the student to reach out to us, to collaborate, maybe even with peers, to figure out how to close their knowledge gaps. We hope this snapshot has been helpful, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. If you have questions, reach out, info@drsellarseducate.com.